New Haven, Connecticut, 4:47 p.m. The sun hung low above the quiet streets of Elmwood Avenue, casting long amber shadows on the cracked sidewalks. It was one of those early summer afternoons when the breeze still had a bite, and the city pretended to be at peace. But for Jalen Price, peace was a fragile illusion. Behind the wheel of his charcoal gray Mercedes, Jalen looked every bit the polished professional he was. Clean-cut, suit-pressed, a Bluetooth earpiece tucked into his right ear. At 39, Jalen had the poise of a man who'd seen too much and said too little. As he drove past the small boutiques and coffee shops that dotted the street, jazz spilled softly from the speakers, steadying his thoughts after a long day. Then came the flash. Red and blue lights ignited in his rear-view mirror. He sighed. Jalen pulled to the curb, turned off the ignition, and placed both hands on the steering wheel. No sudden moves. No questions asked. Just survival. A white Ford Cruiser rolled up behind him, and out stepped Officer Dana Whitmore, her uniform crisp, her jaw clenched. She was in her early 40s, buzz-cut blonde hair tucked under her cap, and a reputation that made even her fellow officers walk on eggshells. Dana was known for one thing, stopping black men who didn't look like they belonged. She walked up to Jalen's window like she owned the road. Her hand hovered over her holstered weapon. License and registration. She snapped, not bothering to say hello. Jalen stayed calm. "Officer, may I ask why I've been stopped?" Dana's lip curled slightly. "Broken taillight." Jalen blinked. "I had the car service last week. Everything." "I said broken taillight." She barked again, tapping the window harder. "Step out of the vehicle." Dash cam rolling. Always rolling. Jalen unbuckled his seatbelt and slowly opened the door. He stood, tall and unflinching, 6'2", broad-shouldered and silent. He knew the dance. He'd been practicing it since he was 16. Dana's eyes scanned him with disgust. The suit, the car, the composure. She hated it. Hated that he wasn't afraid. "You're in a high-crime zone, moving suspiciously slow. You match a description," she added without conviction. "A description of what?" Jalen asked calmly, keeping his voice low, his movements precise. She ignored him and shoved him toward the back of the car. Hands on the hood. He hesitated just a second too long. Her baton was out in a blink, slamming into his ribcage. "You resisting?" "No, ma'am," he gasped. She wrenched his arm behind his back, hard, his face pressed against the warm metal of his own car. With a metallic click, the cuff snapped shut. Across the street, a few people stopped to watch. A teenager raised his phone, recording. Others murmured, unsure whether to interfere or retreat into silence. "You're under arrest for suspicious activity," Dana declared loudly, as if she were performing for the cameras. "Potential weapons possession." She shoved him into the back seat of her cruiser with force that felt less about duty and more about dominance. From the rear-view mirror, Jalen stared back at her, his face calm, his body still, but his eyes burned. Dana stared at him through the glass, unnerved. That look, that silence, it wasn't fear. It was something else. Something she didn't understand. Something that would soon haunt her. The New Haven police precinct smelled of stale coffee and sweat. Paperwork littered desks. Radios squawked from every corner. Dana dragged Jalen through the side entrance like a trophy. Her smirk had returned. She handed him off to the booking officer. Possible illegal firearm. Resisted arrest. Jalen didn't say a word. They took his fingerprints. Snapped his mugshot. Tossed him into a holding cell like he was trash. As the iron bars slammed shut behind him, Jalen finally allowed himself to exhale. He sat down on the cold bench, leaned back against the cement wall, and slowly smiled. Not a grin, not arrogance, just the quiet satisfaction of a man who had seen this coming. He had expected this. Because Jalen Price wasn't just another black man in court. He was watching, recording, waiting. The next morning, Dana's phone buzzed nonstop. The video had gone viral. Dashcam footage. Full clarity. No edits. No spin. The clip of her dragging a well-dressed black man out of Mercedes and beating him against his car had racked up 2.6 million views overnight. The hashtags were flooding in. Hashtag racist cop. Hashtag black man in court. Hashtag justice for Jalen. By 10 a.m., Dana was placed on administrative leave. By 11, the mayor's office released a statement. And by noon, local news vans parked outside her precinct. She watched it all unfold on her phone, fists clenched, heart racing. Her humiliation, her exposure, her unraveling. And she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going down alone. The internet was on fire. By sunrise, the dashcam video of Jalen Price being slammed against his own car by Officer Dana Whitmore had crossed 5 million views. Local news anchors used phrases like abuse of power and clear excessive force. Civil rights advocates posted support statements. Celebrities started resharing the video. And by 8 a.m., the city of New Haven, Connecticut, woke up to an uncomfortable truth. One of their own cops had assaulted a black man for no reason. But inside a downtown apartment, Jalen sat in silence. The living room was dim, blinds drawn. His phone vibrated nonstop, but he ignored it. On his laptop screen, the video played in a loop, the same moment over and over again. The pullover, the fabricated accusation, the slam against the hood, her voice, his silence. From the kitchen, Kendra, his wife, appeared holding 2 mugs of coffee. She placed one on the table beside him and knelt gently. "You sure you want to keep watching that?" she asked, brushing her hand against his arm. Jalen didn't take his eyes off the screen. "I need to remember every second." The doorbell rang. He stood slowly, walked to the door, and opened to find a man in a suit holding a thick folder. "Mr. Price, I'm Assistant District Attorney Paul Gaines. The court has requested your presence for an official hearing. Today, noon." Jalen looked at him, unreadable. "For what?" "The city wants your statement under oath regarding the use of force in your arrest. The mayor's office is under pressure. They want transparency." Jalen took the folder, flipped through the notice, and nodded. "See you at noon." City Hall buzzed like a wasp's nest. Cameras lined the marble steps. Protesters shouted outside, hoisting signs that read, "Racist cop must go. Black lives can't be beaten into silence. Hashtag justice for Jalen." Inside, the chamber was packed. A dozen reporters scribbled notes. Community leaders filled the benches. And in the center, wearing a gray suit and a silent expression, stood Jalen Price, facing the New Haven Public Inquiry panel. The panel's lead, a gray-haired judge named Elsbeth King, adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. "Mr. Price, thank you for appearing on such short notice. Do you swear to tell the truth?" "I do," Jalen said, voice even. She gestured for him to sit. "Please walk us through the events that occurred on Elmwood Avenue yesterday evening." Jalen placed both hands on the table. "I was driving home from work. I just left a strategy meeting with my consulting team. Around 4:45 p.m., I was pulled over by Officer Dana Whitmore. She claimed I had a broken taillight. Did you?" "No, ma'am. The car was serviced 2 days prior. It was in perfect condition." He paused. She approached the vehicle with her hand on her weapon. No greeting. No explanation. She ordered me out of the car, then physically assaulted and arrested me without probable cause. "Were you resisting?" "No." "Did you say anything inflammatory?" I asked her to explain the stop. "Did you record the interaction?" "Yes. My vehicle has a dash cam that runs 24/7. Is that the footage currently circulating online?" "It is." Murmurs rose from the gallery. One of the panelists, a younger woman, leaned in. "Why do you think she targeted you?" Jalen took a breath. "Because I'm a black man in a suit, driving a car she thought I didn't deserve. I didn't give her attitude. I didn't raise my voice. But I didn't shrink either. And that bothered her." The room fell still. Outside the courtroom, the wind carried shouts and honking horns. Protesters surrounded the precinct. The police union released a statement defending Dana. All officers deserve due process before judgment. But inside her apartment, Dana Whitmore wasn't thinking about process. She was thinking about payback. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through tweets, her name trending globally. Her face, frozen in screenshots from the video, plastered across every platform. Words like monster, bigot, abuser. They didn't know her. They didn't know the battles she'd fought, how she clawed her way into that uniform. And now, one smug black man was going to ruin her? Not if she could help it. She picked up her phone and tapped a name she hadn't called in over a year. Deputy Chief Vernon Hale. He answered after 2 rings. Whitmore? I need help, she said, voice low. He's turning the city against me. A long pause. You sure it's him? He's smart. Too smart. Smiles like he's above everything. Send me the footage. I'll look into him. Already done. Vernon grunted. You want this cleaned up? I want it buried. He exhaled. All right, but this won't be free. You still owe me for 2021. Dana closed her eyes. And I'll pay. Then I'll make the call. Consider it handled. That night, as Jalen sat with Kendra in their kitchen, reviewing messages from supporters and journalists, he didn't know that a new trap was already being set. One phone call, one planted weapon, one anonymous tip, and the city would turn on him just as quickly as it had rallied behind him. Because in New Haven, truth had a time limit, and power never gave up without a fight. New Haven slept under a false calm. The streets were still, the skies silent, but inside Deputy Chief Vernon Hale's office, the gears of corruption were already grinding. He sat behind a steel desk in the back of the precinct, the overhead lights flickering like a heartbeat. Vernon was a thick, broad-shouldered man with a cleanly shaved head and a mustache that twitched whenever he was scheming. And right now, it was twitching nonstop. Let me be clear, Dana, he said, setting a black Glock 19 on the table between them. Once we do this, there's no walking it back. Across from him, Officer Dana Whitmore sat stiffly, her knuckles pale from how tightly she gripped her knees. The room stank of burnt coffee and cigarette smoke, but her mind was too focused to notice. I don't need to walk anything back, she replied coldly. I need this handled. I'm not letting some black man in court dismantle everything I've worked for. Vernon picked up the gun and examined it like it was a scalpel. No prints. Serial number filed. Came from that evidence locker fire last year, remember? She nodded. And the tip? I'll make the call, Vernon said, from an anonymous line. It'll go to dispatch around 3 a.m., just enough detail to sound urgent. Then we send in the squad before sunrise. Dana stood. I'll place it myself. Vernon raised a brow. You sure? She shot him a glare. If I want this framed right, I have to do it myself. 3:11 a.m., west end of New Haven. Jalen's neighborhood was quiet, blanketed by early morning fog. His sedan sat parked in the driveway, motionless, unaware to become a target. Dana moved like a ghost. She wore black, her badge tucked away. Her hair was pinned tight beneath a cap, and in her gloved hand, she clutched the Glock like it was a piece of evidence rather than a weapon. She popped the trunk using a bypass key Vernon had provided. Inside, under a layer of tools and jumper cables, she placed the gun beneath the spare tire, angled just enough that an officer searching randomly might find it quickly. She shut the trunk softly, her heart beating with cold precision. Then she walked back to her unmarked car, flipped open a cheap prepaid phone, and dialed. 911, what's your emergency? Dana pitched her voice low, scratchy, frightened. I saw this guy loading something into the trunk of a dark sedan. Looked like a gun. He's a tall black man. Lives on Willow Avenue. Click. The plan was in motion. 6:07 a.m. Jalen woke to the smell of coffee. He stretched, his ribs still tender from the assault 2 days ago. In the kitchen, Kendra hummed softly as she flipped pancakes, trying to bring normalcy back to a house that had seen too much chaos in too short a time. He smiled faintly. Smells good. Thought I'd surprise you, she said, grinning. You're kind of famous now. Jalen chuckled dryly. Yeah, the kind of famous that gets you disinvited from your own neighborhood block party. Before she could reply, they both heard it. Sirens, fast and aggressive. Not the casual kind. Not passing by. coming for them. Jalen froze. 3 police cruisers tore into the driveway, tires screaming, doors flying open. Officers with drawn weapons swarmed the yard. "Hands in the air now!" Someone barked through a bullhorn. Kendra screamed. Jalen instinctively stepped in front of her, both arms raised. "We didn't do anything." Officers moved with robotic precision. One pulled Kendra away. Another shoved Jalen to the ground. A third opened the trunk. Seconds later, weapon located. Glock 19. "No!" Jalen shouted, face pressed to the pavement. "That's not mine. That's not mine." "Mr. Price, you are under arrest for illegal possession of firearm and suspicion of trafficking." "What?" Kendra shrieked. "This has to be a mistake." But no one listened. The cuffs clamped around Jalen's wrists tighter than ever, the same wrist that had already been bruised by the system. He looked up as they dragged him toward the cruiser. Across the street, neighbors had begun to gather. Phones out, faces blank. Some whispering, some nodding. "See? I knew he was shady. Too slick for his own good." The crowd didn't cheer this time. They didn't scream either. They simply watched as a black man in court became a black man in cuffs. Again. At the precinct, the booking process felt colder, more rehearsed. Jalen said nothing as they fingerprinted him. Nothing as they took his mugshot again. Nothing as they stuffed him back into the same holding cell where he'd sat just days before. But his mind raced. That gun. He'd never seen it before. He knew it was planted. But how? When? And then he remembered the look Dana gave him in the rear-view mirror. The way she gripped the wheel tighter. The way she didn't brake. There hadn't been fear. It had been calculation. In the parking garage below the precinct, Dana stood beside Vernon's car, sipping from a styrofoam cup. "It's done," she said. Vernon lit a cigarette. "You want a heads up when he brakes?" She shook her head. "He won't." Vernon chuckled. "You afraid of him?" Dana looked out into the fog, rolling over the city. "No," she said, "but I don't like the way he looks at me." Vernon narrowed his eyes. "How's that?" "Like he already knows how this ends." The courtroom smelled of polished wood and anticipation. It was a kind of space designed to look impartial. Marble floors, high ceilings, the scales of justice etched into walls. But Jalen Price knew better. In places like this, truth didn't always rise. Sometimes it drowned in procedure. He sat at the defense table, shoulders squared, suit crisp despite a sleepless night in lockup. His wrists still bore faint red marks from the handcuffs. The weight of the room pressed against him like humidity before a storm. Kendra sat behind him in the gallery, her fingers clenched tightly in her lap, eyes locked on her husband. She didn't blink much, as if even a second of looking away might cost her everything. To Jalen's right was Naomi Prescott, his attorney, sharp-eyed, mid-40s, a litigator who had spent most of her career losing to the very system she believed in. But not today. Today, she came to fight. Across the aisle, District Attorney Edwin Marsh, a man with a receding hairline, navy tie too tight at the neck, and a voice like he was always apologizing, fumbled with his yellow legal pad. And at the center, perched above them all, was Judge Philip Rosenthal, early 60s, silver hair slicked back, eyes that had seen too many cases and too little justice. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Marsh, please read the charges." Marsh stood. "Your Honor, the state charges Mr. Jalen Price with unlawful possession of firearm, obstruction of justice, and potential connection to illicit weapon trafficking." He paused for drama. Poorly. A Glock 19 was discovered in the trunk of the defendant's vehicle following an anonymous tip. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Naomi leaned in. "Don't react," she whispered. "No matter what." Jalen nodded once. His jaw clenched. The prosecution wasted no time parading procedure. Officer Tyler Brinks, one of the arresting officers, took the stand first. He testified to acting on an anonymous 911 call. He described the Glock found in Jalen's trunk, claimed it was perfectly placed under the spare tire. When Naomi cross-examined, her voice was ice. "Did you have a warrant, Officer Brinks?" "No, ma'am. The tip was considered time-sensitive." Did the tip specify the type of weapon? No. Did the caller identify themselves? No. Naomi raised a brow. So, to be clear, you acted on an anonymous call with no warrant, no probable cause beyond a vague claim, and you just happened to find a gun in a spotless vehicle owned by a man with no criminal record? Brinks hesitated. Correct. Naomi smiled coldly. Thank you. No further questions. The gallery stirred again. Someone whispered, "That doesn't add up." Then came the forensic specialist, a tech named Reed Carson. He testified that the Glock showed no usable fingerprints, no DNA, no trace evidence tying it to Jalen. But Marsh twisted it with polished spin. Criminals don't leave fingerprints, Your Honor. That's what makes them criminals. Naomi rolled her eyes. Or that gun was never his to begin with. After a recess, Naomi called her client to the stand. The courtroom held its breath as Jalen Price took the oath and sat beneath the fluorescent lights, the symbol of every black man in court, trying to explain himself to a system that decided long ago not to listen. Naomi stood tall. "Mr. Price, did you place that weapon in your vehicle?" "No, I did not." "Have you ever owned an unregistered firearm?" "No." "Were you aware a gun was in your trunk the day police arrived at your home?" "I was not. I keep tools and jumper cables in that compartment." "That's it. Why do you think someone would plant a weapon in your car?" Jalen looked directly at the jury. "Because I went public with what Officer Dana Whitmore did to me. Because I made people uncomfortable. Because some people in this city don't want a black man to hold power or tell the truth or fight back." His voice didn't rise, but it thundered anyway. Marsh didn't dare cross-examine him. He knew he couldn't. Instead, he turned to procedural strategy. Stall, delay, doubt. "Your Honor," he said, "the state requests time to review newly received footage related to the defendant's prior conduct." Naomi shot up. "Objection. There's no evidence. Just noise. That's all they've had from the start." Judge Rosenthal rubbed his temple. Tired. "We'll reconvene tomorrow for continuation." He banged the gavel. Court adjourned. Outside the courthouse, the temperature had dropped, but the city was still boiling. Protesters lined the sidewalk. Some chanted. Some cried. Some just stood in silence. Jalen exited the front steps to a sea of cameras. Microphones were shoved toward him. "Jalen, how do you feel about the charges? Do you think Officer Whitmore is targeting you? Is this racism or retaliation?" He didn't speak. He just took Kendra's hand and walked forward. Meanwhile, in a dark conference room inside the precinct, Vernon Hale stared at a monitor playing Jalen's courtroom testimony. Behind him, Dana paced. "He's gaining ground," she muttered. "They're listening to him." Vernon leaned back, folding his arms. "We'll change the story." Dana frowned. "How?" He opened a file folder on the desk. Inside, a photo of a pawn shop, a manila envelope, and check already signed. Vernon looked up and smiled. "Every hero becomes a villain. All we need is the right lie." The first article dropped at 6:02 a.m. It started small, a local tabloid known for sensational headlines and shady sources. The headline screamed across the homepage. "Breaking, Jalen Price's criminal past uncovered. Is the activist hiding more than he's telling?" Inside, the story detailed a supposed sealed arrest from 2014, possession with intent to distribute. A mugshot of a man who looked vaguely like Jalen accompanied the article. Grainy, shadowy, purposefully unclear. Less than an hour later, it had been shared 12,000 times. By noon, the story was everywhere. New Haven Bulletin, Connecticut Now, Channel 7. Cable news anchors spoke about it in the same breath as the court proceedings. While Mr. Price claims to be the victim of a corrupt cop, records now suggest he may have a more complicated past. None of them questioned the validity. None of them checked the source. And none of them knew that Vernon Hale had paid a freelance graphic designer $300 to mock up a criminal record that didn't exist. Inside their two-bedroom apartment, Jalen and Kendra watched the wildfire spread from the couch, disbelief etched into their faces. Kendra stared at the TV, the mugshot on the screen, her voice hollow. That's not even you. I know, Jalen said quietly. They didn't even spell your middle name right. I know. The news anchor's voice cut through the silence. Mr. Price has yet to respond to these allegations. Jalen stood suddenly and grabbed the remote, clicking the TV off. The screen went black, but the chaos outside their windows was only just beginning. He turned to Kendra. I need to talk to Naomi. Right now. Naomi Prescott was already at her office, her third coffee in hand, phone pinned to her ear, laptop flooded with open tabs, PDFs, and screenshots. When Jalen stormed in, she didn't even look up. They're playing the oldest trick in the book, she muttered, tossing her phone on the desk. You win the room, so they poisoned the jury pool. He sat across from her, jaw clenched. The record's fake. I know it's fake. There's no arrest, no booking. I pulled your background 5 times. You're clean. You always have been. Then why is everyone acting like it's real? Naomi finally looked up. Because it doesn't have to be real. It just has to go viral. Meanwhile, in a quiet bar outside town, Vernon Hale met with a man named Chuck Laramie, the editor who published the original hit piece. Chuck was a greasy type. Thinning hair, nicotine-stained fingers, eyes like a rat. You sure this won't come back on me? Chuck asked, nursing a whiskey neat. Vernon smiled without warmth. You posted an anonymous leak. You didn't verify. That's not a crime. That's just bad journalism. Chuck chuckled. The clicks are off the charts. People love a good fall from grace story. They especially love it when the hero's black, Vernon said, swirling his drink. Chuck didn't argue. Back in the city, the tide had shifted. The same neighbors who had nodded at Jalen in solidarity now crossed the street when they saw him. Strangers stared longer. A woman at the grocery store muttered, "Should have known." Kendra overheard it. She squeezed the handle of her cart and whispered through clenched teeth, "These people will believe anything." On the front lawn of their apartment building, someone spray-painted "Thug" in red across the mailbox. Kendra cried for the first time in days. Not out of fear. Out of rage. At the next court hearing, the difference was visible. The gallery, once packed with supporters and journalists, now sat half full. Protest signs were fewer. Reporters asked different questions now. Mr. Price, do you deny the 2014 drug charge? Have you ever used your community activism as a cover for criminal activity? The questions were more loaded. The tone was colder. Even Judge Rosenthal's patience seemed thinner. Naomi stood to object 3 times within the first hour. Once, she was nearly held in contempt. When court recessed for lunch, Jalen didn't eat. He sat alone in the hallway, staring at the tile floor like it might offer answers. Naomi joined him, handing him a bottle of water. They want to bury you, she said. They already have. She sat beside him. Not yet. That night, Kendra found Jalen standing on the porch, arms folded, staring at the freshly cleaned mailbox. Why does it feel like I'm losing ground even when I'm telling the truth? He asked. She slipped her arm through his. Because lies spread faster than the truth ever could. A beat passed. Then I need to change the game, he said. She turned to him. What does that mean? It means I can't just defend myself anymore. I need to go on the offensive. Kendra didn't smile, but she nodded. I'm with you, she said. Just be careful. Across town, Dana sat in her apartment, watching the same coverage Jalen had turned off hours earlier. She smiled, not because she felt safe, but because the man who once looked at her like he'd already won now looked like he wasn't so sure. She picked up her phone, dialed Vernon. He's on his heels, she said. Good, Vernon replied. Time for the knockout. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of calm that always felt like a setup. New Haven's Lincoln Park lay quiet beneath a slate sky, the grass damp from overnight rain, the air thick with late summer humidity. By noon, it would be filled with people, neighbors, students, local pastors, and organizers. And in the middle of it all, Jalen Price, standing on a makeshift wooden stage, holding on to the last threads of his reputation. It wasn't a rally. Not officially. The permits labeled it as a community healing event, But the signs were clear. Justice for Jalen. Racist cop, lying system. Black man in court is not equal to guilty. Jalen stood behind the podium, eyes scanning the swelling crowd of a few hundred. Kendra stood near the edge of the stage, her arms folded tightly, nerves etched in every line of her face. She hadn't smiled in days. At the far edge of the lawn, Naomi Prescott whispered into her phone, confirming the live stream was up and running. A small camera crew captured the scene for an independent media outlet. They were the only ones who still covered the case without spin. Jalen stepped up to the mic, clearing his throat. The crowd quieted. Children were hushed. Phones were lifted. He spoke low at first. You've heard the stories. You've read the headlines. You've seen that video. A murmur of agreement. Now they want to convince you that I'm dangerous, that I've got a criminal record, that I planted a gun, that I'm the reason your city's on edge. He paused. But the truth is simple. I'm being targeted. Not because of what I've done, but because of what I represent. He raised his voice slightly, letting the weight settle. I represent a black man in court who didn't kneel, who didn't run, who said, no more. The crowd responded with rising applause. Fists in the air. A mother clutched her son's hand. A pastor wiped his eyes. But let me say this, Jalen continued, pointing to the sky. I am not here to make you angry. I'm here to remind you that truth is louder than lies, and we will not be silenced. The applause swelled. And then, 3 sharp cracks. Gunfire. Panic detonated like a bomb. The first bullet didn't hit anyone. Neither did the second or third. But that wasn't the point. People screamed, ducked, scattered. Parents grabbed children. Folding chairs toppled. A man tripped over a stroller. Someone shouted, "Shoot her!" Even though there was no one in sight. Jalen instinctively jumped down from the stage and shielded Kendra with his body. He scanned the rooftops, heart pounding. Naomi crouched near a speaker tower, yelling into her phone, "Get emergency services here now." A 4-shot rang out, but it was farther this time, echoing off a rooftop. It was enough. Within minutes, the sound of sirens ripped through the air. A wave of police cruisers swarmed the park. Jalen stood with his hands raised, palms open, as officers stormed toward him. "I didn't do this," he yelled. But they didn't care. Officer Briggs, one of Vernon's loyalists, barked the orders, place him under arrest, inciting a riot. Jalen's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious." Briggs didn't even blink. "You brought these people together. Someone opened fire. That makes you responsible." Kendra pushed forward, screaming. He didn't do anything. He was speaking for peace. A female officer yanked her back roughly. The crowd, now dazed and disoriented, watched in silence as Jalen was cuffed once again, the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Naomi ran toward them, waving her bar ID. "You arrest him and I swear." "Talk to the DA." Briggs snapped. "He's already signed the order." Across the street, hidden inside a black SUV with tinted windows, Vernon Hale and Dana Whitmore watched it unfold like a private theater. Dana smirked. "That's what happens when you play hero." Vernon sipped from a paper cup. "A little noise, a little fear. People see a black man in court as a criminal, but a black man with crowd? That's a threat." Dana's smirk faded just a little. "He still doesn't look afraid." Vernon followed her gaze. Jalen was being shoved into a squad car, but his eyes, they burned like coals. Not in rage, in resolve. Vernon shrugged. "He will be." At the precinct, they didn't even bother with formalities. No bail hearing. No phone call. They threw him into a holding cell, like a piece of evidence no one wanted to claim. The walls were the same shade of institutional gray. The cot was metal, hard and cold. Jalen sat there, his shirt damp with sweat, mind replaying the scene. The gunfire, the screams, the chaos, the feeling of being caged again. But this time felt worse, because this time they'd made it look like he caused it. Outside the courthouse, Naomi stood with Kendra on the steps. Reporters swarmed them. Did Jalen plan the rally? Was there a known threat? "Do you have a statement on the allegations?" Naomi didn't flinch. She stepped up to the podium someone had left behind and spoke with fire in her throat. Jalen Price is not the criminal here. The people framing him are the ones you should be chasing. This is not a justice system. This is a trap. Her voice echoed down the marble facade. That night, in her apartment, Dana poured herself a glass of wine and leaned back into her recliner. She pulled up the news on her tablet. Rally led by Jalen Price ends in gunfire. Police investigating role of organizer. She tapped her finger against the rim of her glass. That's the headline I wanted, she whispered. Behind her, the shadows stretched long across the walls. And across the city in a cold, windowless cell, Jalen stared into the dark, silently promising himself one thing. This wasn't over. Not even close. Rain hammered down on the roof of the New Haven Municipal Courthouse. It was Monday morning, but it felt like a reckoning. The courtroom was packed again. Reporters, activists, ordinary citizens hungry for clarity in a story that had grown murky, weaponized, and poisoned by headlines. In the defendant's chair sat Jalen Price, dressed in county-issued khakis and a white dress shirt Naomi had managed to bring in that morning. He looked calm, not defeated, not bitter, just focused, like someone who knew the storm was still circling, but also knew which direction to move next. Behind him, Kendra sat stone still, her eyes sharp, her fingers clutching the edge of her coat. Her face bore the bruises of exhaustion, not violence, though the emotional bruising was enough. At the prosecution table, District Attorney Edwin Marsh sorted through his notes with the anxiety of a man juggling lies while cameras rolled. Judge Rosenthal entered promptly at 9 a.m. sharp. The court will now hear the defense's motion for evidence review. Ms. Prescott, proceed. Naomi stood. Her black suit was soaked to the edges from the rain, but her voice was steady. Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce new digital evidence that undermines the foundation of Officer Dana Whitmore's original arrest of my client, Mr. Price. Judge Rosenthal raised a brow. Go on. Naomi clicked a remote. The courtroom lights dimmed. A monitor lit up on the wall behind the bench. Dashcam footage. Time-stamped June 11th, 4:47 p.m. Everyone in the room went quiet. The video began to play, grainy, but clear enough. Jalen's Mercedes pulled over to the side of the road. Moments later, Officer Dana Whitmore approached, her hand already on her holster. There was no aggression from Jalen, no sudden movement, no raised voice, no threats, just compliance. Then Dana opened the door without warning, yanked Jalen out by the arm, and slammed him face first onto the hood. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Someone whispered, she lied. Naomi paused the video. Your Honor, as clearly shown, my client was calm, non-confrontational, and fully compliant. Officer Whitmore claimed he resisted arrest. This video shows otherwise. Judge Rosenthal's face tensed. Dame Marsh stood. Your Honor, while we acknowledge the footage, we believe it may have been manipulated. Naomi cut in. This footage was pulled directly from Mr. Price's vehicle, authenticated by a third-party forensic firm, and corroborated by GPS logs. There's no manipulation here, just the truth. Rosenthal held up a hand. Enough. The court recognizes this footage as valid. Officer Whitmore's claim of resistance is hereby discredited. A beat, and the assault charge is dismissed. Applause broke out. Quiet at first, then stronger. Kendra's hands flew to her mouth. Naomi turned and smiled at Jalen, but her eyes stayed sharp. This wasn't a win. Not yet. Outside the courthouse, the story exploded again. Dashcam shatters officer story. Assault charge drop against Jalen Price. Racist cops' lives begin to crumble. Black man in court fights back and wins first round. Social media reignited. Hashtag Justice for Jalen began trending again. But inside an unmarked car parked half a block from the courthouse, Dana Whitmore wasn't reading headlines. She was watching Jalen on a live stream, his hands folded calmly as he exited the building beside Naomi. He didn't look smug. He looked determined, and that infuriated her more than anything else. She slammed her fist into the steering wheel. They bought it. Beside her, Vernon Hale was already on the phone. Time for Plan B, he muttered. I'll call the pawn shop. That afternoon, Naomi was reviewing court documents at her office when her assistant, Claire, burst in holding a paper. "You need to see this." It was a sworn affidavit. A new witness, a local pawn shop owner named Denny Marsden, claiming that Jalen Price had come to his store 2 weeks prior, waving a Glock and threatening him if he didn't buy it. The document said Jalen fled when the man refused. No police report was ever filed. No video surveillance provided. But the affidavit was notarized, and it was now part of the official court file. Naomi stared at it for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and dialed Jalen. That evening, Naomi and Jalen met in the back room of her office. The rain hadn't stopped, and the thrum of it on the window panes felt like a warning. "Do you know this guy?" she asked. Jalen looked at the name. "Never heard of him. He owns a pawn shop on 10th Street. Says you tried to sell him a gun." "That's a lie. I've never even set foot in that store." Naomi's eyes narrowed. "This smells like Vernon." "They know they're losing," Jalen said. "They're planting distractions, trying to reset the narrative." "Well, it's working. The court can't ignore a sworn affidavit, even if it's garbage." Jalen stood, pacing. "This was never about just me, Naomi. It was about what I represent. If they can break me publicly, they can make every black man in court seem like a ticking time bomb." Naomi's voice softened. "And what if they keep pushing, keep fabricating? Then we keep fighting," he said. "But this time we fight smarter." He pulled out a flash drive from his pocket and slid it across the table. "What's this?" she asked. Jalen looked her dead in the eye. "A copy of everything I've been documenting. Every conversation, every tail car, every threat, just in case." Naomi didn't ask why he had it. She just nodded and backed it up twice. Across the city, at the pawn shop on 10th, Denny Marsden locked up early. He moved stiffly, counting the envelope of cash Vernon had handed him an hour ago. He told himself it wasn't personal, just business. He didn't know Jalen Price. He didn't care. But he'd do what he was told, because debts had to be paid. And people like Vernon didn't forgive easily. The morning began with the hiss of a kettle and the smell of burnt toast. Inside their small New Haven apartment, Kendra Price tried to pretend it was just another Tuesday. She wore her best fake smile, packed lunch for her students, and hummed a lullaby out of tune, not for herself, but for sanity's sake. But her hands shook. Across the table, Jalen stared at his phone, scrolling through headlines he wished were fiction. Pawn shop owner testifies. Price brandished gun. Black activist story crumbling under new evidence. Racist cop attacks black man in court, but was she right? "I've never even owned a gun," Jalen muttered, almost himself. Kendra didn't reply. She just buttered toast that neither of them would eat. He looked up. "You okay?" She froze for a second. "I lost my job, Jalen." His brow furrowed. "What?" Kendra reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. They said too many parents were complaining. Something about being uncomfortable with me around their kids. Jalen stood up from the table, pacing. "You've been teaching at that daycare for 5 years." They didn't care. Her voice cracked. They didn't even look me in the eye. He ran a hand down his face. "I'll talk to Naomi. Maybe we can get a statement out." "No," she snapped. "No more statements. No more cameras. No more microphones. I'm tired of defending the fact that I married a good man." He stopped, stunned. "I'm sorry," she whispered, eyes welling. I'm exhausted, Jalen. They're not just after you anymore. They're after us." At 3:17 a.m. that night, a sound shattered the silence. Glass. Screaming. A thud. Jalen jolted out of bed, sprinting down the hallway in bare feet. Kendra was already there, standing frozen at the front door, one hand over her mouth. The front window had been smashed. A brick lay on the floor amidst a sea of shattered glass. Spray painted across its surface, in jagged red letters. "Get out, black pig." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the wind slipping through the broken window, carrying the faint echo of tires screeching off into the night. Kendra's breath trembled. Jalen stepped forward. carefully picked up the brick, and turned it over in his hand. There was no signature, just hate. The police arrived 30 minutes later. A patrolman with hollow eyes took notes mechanically while his partner swept a flashlight through the yard. "We'll file a report," he said, not looking Jalen in the face. "Probably just kids being stupid." Jalen nearly laughed. "Kids don't own paint markers and leave messages like that." The officer shrugged. Nothing was stolen. No one was hurt. Not technically a felony. Kendra stared at him, voice thin. "So you're not going to do anything?" "We'll increase patrols in the area," the officer offered half-heartedly. "Best we can do." And with that, they left. The next morning, Naomi came over with plywood, gloves, and a hammer. "You sure you don't want to stay at my place?" she asked, standing in the doorway, sleeves rolled up. "I'm not running," Jalen said, gripping the hammer. "They want us to be afraid. I won't give them that." Kendra didn't speak. She swept up the glass quietly, methodically, her fingers trembling slightly. Naomi helped Jalen lift the plywood, holding it steady as he drilled it into the window frame. The sound echoed through the neighborhood. It was louder than it needed to be. Maybe that was the point. Later that day, the whispers returned. Jalen went to the corner market to buy milk and bread. Two women paused their conversation as he entered. One of them turned her back. A man at the register gave him change without a word. Back home, Kendra received a message on Facebook from an old friend. "I'm sorry, but I just can't associate with this anymore. It's too much. I hope you understand." She deleted it without replying, then turned off her phone. At sunset, Jalen stood on the porch with Naomi. The plywood reflected the golden light, like a scar. "We know who did this," Naomi said softly. Jalen nodded. "Vernon? We can't prove it." "Not yet." Naomi leaned against the railing. "He's turning the entire city against you." Jalen stared at the house across the street. The curtains that didn't move, the porch light that flicked off when he walked by. "They don't need evidence," he said. "They just need enough smoke." She looked at him. "Then we give them fire." He turned toward her. "I have a backup plan," he said. Naomi blinked. "What kind of plan?" He pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. "Everything I've been gathering. If something happens to me, release it." "Jalen, this isn't just about getting free," he interrupted. "It's about showing the world what they've done to me, to my wife, to the truth." She clutched the drive like it was glass. Across town, Vernon Hale poured whiskey into a chip glass and watched the evening news. The anchor read off a new headline. "Price home vandalized. Authorities call it a random act." He chuckled to himself. In the corner of the room, Dana leaned against the wall, arms crossed, sipping from a can of beer. "He's still standing," she muttered. "For now," Vernon said. "But he's cracking." She raised an eyebrow. "How do you know?" He sipped then smirked. "Because we haven't even hit the part where we break his hope." The rain had passed, but the city still dripped with silence. At New Haven Police Precinct, third shift had just clocked in. The station buzzed with the usual hum of paperwork, half-eaten sandwiches, and radio chatter. Phones rang. Doors creaked open. Somewhere down the hall, a vending machine clunked. But inside the cramped supply room near the back, lit only by a humming fluorescent tube, Devin Briggs stood frozen, clutching a flash drive like it weighed 100 pounds. He wasn't like the other officers. Still fresh-faced, still believing the job could be about something noble. But lately, that belief had been bleeding out, one shift at a time. He checked the hallway again. Clear. Then he slipped the drive into his pocket and left. 20 minutes later, Naomi Prescott looked up from her desk as a knock rattled her office door. "Yeah." It opened slowly. Devin stepped in, rein still on his shoulders, eyes darting. "You don't know me," he said quickly. "But I know you. You represent Jalen Price." Naomi's spine straightened. "Who are you?" "Officer Briggs. Patrol Division. I work under Deputy Hale." That name shifted the air instantly. Naomi's voice dropped an octave. "You need to leave." "I can't," Devin said. He stepped forward, reaching into his jacket. "I have something." You need to see this. He held out the flash drive. Naomi hesitated. What is it? A recording. Caught on my body cam by accident 2 weeks ago. I wasn't supposed to be there. They didn't know I had my audio still rolling. She narrowed her eyes. They? Whitmore. Hail. Naomi's hand closed around the drive. I don't know if it's admissible, Devin added, but it's the truth. That night, Naomi met Jalen in the back of a quiet cafe on the edge of downtown. The place had emptied out early. No one wanted to be around him anymore. Even the barista had shot him a look when he walked in. Naomi slid into the booth and set down her laptop. I've got something. Jalen didn't look up from his coffee. Another false witness? No, she said. The opposite. She opened the laptop and inserted the drive. A few keystrokes, and then audio begins. Whitmore, low, he's getting too bold. That video went viral. People are listening. Hale, gravelly, don't worry. We'll bury him. I've got a piece from the evidence locker. No prints. Plan it, call it in, let the system do the rest. Whitmore, and the pawn shop? Hale, already paid off. If he survives the gun charge, we hit him with a new story. Something that'll rot him from the inside. Whitmore, God, I hate his face. Like he's untouchable. Hale, chuckling, not for long. End of audio. Jalen stared at the screen, lips pressed into a thin line. The color drained from his face, not out of fear, but out of rage finally given shape. They said that, he whispered. Out loud. Naomi nodded. The whole thing. He leaned back in his seat, chest rising slowly. This is it, Naomi. This is a crack in their foundation. Naomi didn't smile. Not yet. We still need a judge willing to hear it. And it's only one recording. The DA will try to dismiss it as fake or manipulated. Then we get it authenticated. By someone outside the system. I'm already making calls. Jalen rubbed his temples. How do we protect Devin? Naomi paused. We don't. Not really. If they find out he leaked this... Jalen nodded. Then he's next. At the precinct, Devin lay awake in the cot in the corner of the locker room. His badge sat on the bench beside him, flipped upside down. His phone buzzed. No ID. He swallowed and picked up. You think we don't know what you did? The voice was flat, mechanical, masked by a voice changer. You're not a hero, Briggs. You're next. Click. Devin sat up, drenched in sweat. The next morning, Naomi filed an emergency motion with the court, requesting the inclusion of the new recording as evidence in Jalen's case. Within hours, the news caught wind. Leaked audio suggests corruption at highest levels of New Haven PD. Racist cop, crooked deputy. Evidence mounts. Black man in court may have been targeted all along. Jalen's name climbed back into trending, but this time, not as a suspect. As a symbol. Inside her apartment, Dana Whitmore watched the headlines and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Panic. She dialed Vernon. They have a recording, she said. Body cam. You and me, talking about the plant. Silence on the other end. Then, I'll handle it. Vernon Hale didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office, shades drawn, a bottle of scotch on the table, and a printed copy of Devin Briggs' personnel file in front of him. He flipped through it slowly, looking for leverage. Then he found it. A failed drug test during Devin's academy training. Covered up at the time by a favor. Vernon smiled grimly. He made 2 calls, one to internal affairs, and the other to a contact in the press. At 3:44 a.m., Devin received an unmarked envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a printout of his old drug screen. A post-it note was attached. Testify for him, and this goes public. Your career's done. Maybe your freedom, too. Devin stared at the paper until his vision blurred. Then he sat down, buried his face in his hands, and wept. The courtroom was silent. Too silent. Even the usual shuffle of papers and whispers between attorneys seemed to vanish under the suffocating tension that filled the room. Rain tapped lightly against the high windows, as if trying to warn them all. Something was about to break. Jalen Price sat at the defense table, shoulders squared, face unreadable. He'd worn the same gray suit from last week, the one Kendra had pressed that morning. Even though her hands still trembled from the brick they cleaned up days ago, she sat behind him now, stiff and silent, her lips pressed into a line. Next to Jalen, Naomi Prescott adjusted the microphone at her seat, her fingers tapping nervously against her legal pad. Her instincts, the ones forged from fighting 1,000 hopeless battles, were screaming. Something was wrong. Across the aisle, District Attorney Edwin Marsh rose with a thin smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Your Honor," he said, "the state would like to call a surprise witness." Judge Rosenthal looked up, annoyed. "Mr. Marsh, you were advised to submit your list in full last week. This witness only recently came forward. Your Honor, a key figure, a police officer." Jalen's eyes narrowed. Naomi shot to her feet. "Objection. We haven't had time to review or prepare." "I think you'll want to hear him," Marsh interrupted. Judge Rosenthal sighed. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Marsh." "Of course, Your Honor." Marsh turned to the bailiff. "Please bring in Officer Devin Briggs." The gallery stirred. Naomi's head snapped toward the door, and in walked Devin, the rookie cop who had handed them the recording that could have blown the case wide open. But something was wrong. He looked smaller somehow, hunched inside his uniform like it didn't fit anymore. His skin was pale, his lips tight, his eyes hollow. Jalen locked eyes with him as he approached the stand. Devin looked away. "Officer Briggs," Marsh began smoothly, "you submitted a flash drive to the defense team last week. Can you tell the court what that was?" Devin's voice was low, hoarse, an audio recording, captured by my body cam. "And what did it allegedly contain?" "Voices. Conversations between Deputy Hale and Officer Whitmore about planting evidence." "A bombshell," Marsh said with a slight smirk. "And now—" Devin swallowed. I made it up." The words hit like a punch to the chest. Gasps erupted across the gallery. Naomi's jaw dropped. Kendra clutched the bench in front of her. Jalen didn't move. "Say that again, officer," Marsh said for effect. "I fabricated the audio," Devin said. "I edited clips. I made it sound real, but it wasn't." "Why?" Marsh asked, playing his role to perfection. Devin hesitated. "Jalen Price offered me money. $500. Said if I helped fake the story, he could make Whitmore and Hale look dirty. Make himself look like the victim." The courtroom exploded into gasps and whispers. Naomi leapt up. "Objection. This is perjury, Your Honor. We have chain of custody, forensic signatures." "Sit down, Miss Prescott." Rosenthal barked, gavel slamming. Jalen turned toward Devin, slowly, as if each movement took effort. Their eyes met, and in Devin's, Jalen saw something worse than lies. Fear. Not fear of the court. Fear of someone outside this room. Marsh produced a photocopy of a check. "Your Honor, this is payment made to Officer Briggs from a private account registered to Kendra Price, the defendant's wife. A personal check withdrawn in cash 1 day after the alleged recording was delivered." Kendra stood, her voice sharp. "That's a lie." The bailiff moved toward her, but she sank back down, stunned. Naomi gritted her teeth. "This is manufactured. All of it." Judge Rosenthal didn't respond. His face was unreadable. Marsh turned to Devin. "Do you have any physical evidence that Mr. Price offered you the bribe?" Devin nodded, pulling a small envelope from his pocket. "Text messages," he said. He handed them over. Naomi tried to object again, but Rosenthal waved her down. She turned to Jalen, whispering urgently, "These messages could be spoofed. The check could be forged. We can fight this." Jalen didn't respond. His eyes were still locked on Devin, and his heart was breaking. That night, Jalen sat alone in the holding cell. Same cell, same cot, same flickering bulb. But this time, something was different. The air felt heavier, like the hope he'd been holding on to was bleeding out through invisible cracks. Outside, Naomi paced in the hallway, whispering into her phone. "Yes, I want an independent forensic analysis on those messages. And the check. Fast. Inside the courtroom, Marsh shook hands with Vernon Hale. "Nice work," Marsh muttered. Vernon didn't smile. He just turned and walked away. In a seedy bar across town, Dana Whitmore watched a recap on TV. Surprise witness turns on Price. Claims he fabricated corruption case. She raised a glass and sipped. Her eyes were tired, but her smirk was back. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to, because Jalen Price, the black man in court who had once looked untouchable, now looked like a con. Back in the cell, Jalen sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, head bowed. His mind replayed it over and over again. I made it up. He offered me money. I was scared. His face was calm. But inside, the betrayal ran deeper than any punch they'd ever thrown at him. Not because Devin lied, but because the system made him. Jalen stood and walked toward the bars. He gripped them tight and whispered to himself, "You haven't won. Not yet." The sun was still rising when the stage was set. New Haven's Monroe Plaza buzzed with energy. For the first time in weeks, a fragile sense of momentum surrounded Jalen Price. The betrayal in court had shaken him, yes, but it hadn't shattered him. He refused to let it. Word had spread fast about today's gathering. Supporters called it a peace rally. The city called it unauthorized assembly. But for Jalen, it was something more personal, an act of reclamation, of voice, of presence, of purpose. He stood at the center of the plaza, wearing a navy blue shirt, sleeves rolled, fists unclenched. A microphone crackled to life in his hand. Beside the platform, Naomi Prescott checked the live stream connection. Kendra stood a few feet away, arms folded, heart thumping like a war drum in her chest. She had begged him to cancel this. He had smiled and said, "If I stop speaking, they've already won." Jalen took the mic. A few hundred people had gathered. Some familiar faces from the first protest, others new. College kids, retired teachers, parents holding toddlers on their hips. Homemade signs filled the air. The truth doesn't die under pressure. Black man in court equals human, not threat. We stand with Jalen. Jalen raised his voice, clear and steady. They thought they could bear the truth. They thought smearing my name would silence me. They thought a rigged courtroom would break me. He paused, looked directly into a nearby news camera. They forgot something. The crowd leaned in. I'm still here. A wave of cheers rippled across the plaza. I've been lied about, set up, betrayed. My wife lost her job. Our home was attacked. They made me out to be everything I'm not. But I'm not going anywhere. More cheers. Kendra's eyes shimmered, arms tightening around herself. Naomi didn't blink, watching crowd and the edges of the plaza, with sharp eyes. I know what it looks like, Jalen continued. A black man in court. They assume we're guilty, violent, broken. But what I am is a fighter, a husband, a son, a citizen of this city. He raised his fist. And I will not stop until the system that tried to erase me is held accountable. The applause was thunderous. And then, boom, the explosion ripped through the side of the plaza with a thunderous roar. Orange flames shot into the sky. The sound was so loud it seemed to silence reality itself for a second. Then the screams came. Children cried. Adults ducked. People scrambled in every direction. Dust clouded the air. A second blast followed. Not close enough to kill, but timed perfectly to ignite chaos. Naomi dropped to the ground, dragging Kendra with her. Get down, she shouted. Jalen stood frozen for a split second, not in fear, but in shock. Then instinct kicked in. He dove behind the stage, pulling a boy no older than 6 into cover. His ears rang. His lungs filled with dust. 3 people lay on the ground. A teenage girl, bleeding from her leg. An elderly man unconscious, a trickle of blood down his cheek. A child's shoe, alone in the center of the street. Police sirens wailed in the distance. But they were already too late. Chaos had already been framed. From across the street, inside a nearby parking garage, Deputy Chief Vernon Hale watched through a pair of binoculars. The explosion's reflection glinted off his lenses. Dana Whitmore sat beside him, chewing a toothpick, eyes never leaving the scene. "Beautiful," Vernon muttered. "You think he survives this one?" Dana asked. "He might," Vernon said, "but his story doesn't." 5 minutes later, as the police surrounded the plaza, Jalen emerged from the smoke, arms raised, shirt bloody from helping the wounded. A young officer pointed his weapon at him. "Hands behind your head." "Don't do this," Jalen warned, coughing. But it didn't matter. Another cop came up from behind and shoved him down, pressing his face into the pavement. "You're under arrest for inciting mass violence and suspected manslaughter." Naomi's voice screamed from the crowd. "He didn't do this. He was a target." No one listened, because chaos, once ignited, doesn't care for facts. The headlines were live within the hour. Explosions rocked Jalen Price rally. 3 confirmed dead, dozens injured. Black man in court becomes catalyst for tragedy. Racist cop attacks black man in court. But was he leading a mob all along? The twist was complete. That night, in her jailhouse interview with local news, Naomi sat rigid under fluorescent lighting. Jalen Price did not plan an attack. He's been targeted from the beginning. The gun was planted. The witness lied. Now 3 people are dead, and they're trying to hang it on the only man telling the truth. The reporter raised an eyebrow. "You're saying the police orchestrated a bombing to frame your client?" Naomi looked directly into the lens. "I'm saying the system has declared war on the truth. And Jalen Price is the first casualty they plan to bury." In a hospital room across town, Kendra sat beside a wounded teenager from the blast. The girl's name was Layla. She had come to the rally with her older sister, now dead. Kendra held her hand. "I'm sorry," the girl whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "They said he was dangerous, but he was the only one who tried to help me." Kendra gripped her hand tighter. "Then don't let them make you forget that." And in a dim cell in the basement of the courthouse, Jalen Price sat in silence, arms around his knees, dry blood still on his shirt. He stared at the wall, not broken, but far too close to the edge. And still, not done. The courthouse was a fortress of silence that morning. No chanting protesters. No media vans. No signs waving in the wind. Just a cold, clinical stillness, broken only by the occasional echo of footsteps across polished marble floors. Jalen Price was escorted into the courtroom in shackles. His shirt was pressed, his chin high, but his wrists were still cuffed like he was something to be contained, not heard. The gallery was packed. Every seat filled with journalists, politicians, police officials, and citizens who'd once called for his freedom, now unsure if they should still believe in him. Naomi Prescott sat beside him, hands tight around her case folder. She looked at him and whispered, "You sure about this?" Jalen didn't answer with words. He simply nodded. Judge Rosenthal entered, his expression unreadable. "This is the final pre-trial hearing, before charges proceed to full indictment. Mr. Price, your counsel has filed a last-minute declaration. Do you wish to address this court personally?" Naomi rose. "Your Honor, my client would like to speak for himself." A beat. Rosenthal nodded once. "Proceed." The bailiff stepped forward and unshackled Jalen slowly. The chains clinked as they fell to the floor. He stood, walked to the center of the courtroom, and turned to face the judge, but his eyes quickly swept across the crowd, locking with each of them. And then he spoke. "My name is Jalen Price." He began, voice calm, clear. "You call me a liar, a criminal, a manipulator, a domestic terrorist." He paused. "And yet, I've never raised my voice in anger. I've never lifted a weapon. I've never asked for anything but the truth." Somewhere in the back row, a camera lens clicked. "I've been accused of planting evidence, bribing a witness, and inciting violence. All fabricated, all coordinated, because I stood up against a racist cop and a system that protected her." He turned to the jury box, even though there wasn't one yet. "You've seen what happens when a black man walks into a courtroom in this country. People don't see a man. They see a threat. They see guilt before they hear the facts." Murmurs in the gallery. Jalen raised a small black folder. "This is a signed letter from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, authorizing my position as a special agent within the Department of Justice, assigned to the Internal Affairs and Corruption Task Force. He passed the folder to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. Gasps rippled through the room. I've been undercover for the last 3 years, investigating the New Haven Police Department under suspicion of civil rights violations, excessive force patterns, illegal surveillance, and evidence tampering. Eyes widened. Everything that happened to me was real, but it was never just about me. It was about what's been happening to dozens of others. People who didn't have cameras, who didn't have lawyers, who didn't make a home. He paused again. The silence was deafening. The gun planted in my trunk, the pawn shop witness, the rally explosion. Every single one of those tactics was traced, documented, recorded. Every meeting between Dana Whitmore and Deputy Chief Vernon Hale logged. From the side of the room, a U.S. Marshal stood and approached the bench. Your Honor, the Marshal said, we have authorization to serve federal arrest warrants on 2 individuals present in this courtroom. Gasps echoed. The Marshal turned, pointing directly at Dana, seated behind the prosecution bench. Officer Dana Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and attempted murder. Dana bolted from her chair, but 2 agents tackled her to the ground before she reached the exit. Screams filled the room. The second agent approached Vernon Hale, who hadn't moved. He simply stared at Jalen. The Marshal didn't hesitate. Deputy Chief Vernon Hale, hands where I can see them. Now. Vernon slowly stood, raised his hands, and looked directly at Jalen. You think this changes anything? He sneered. Jalen didn't blink. No, but it ends you. News cameras exploded with flashes as the courtroom turned to chaos. Outside, within minutes, headlines flooded the internet. Racist cop attacks black man in court. Turns pale when she learns his true identity. Breaking. Jalen Price revealed as FBI agent. New Haven police leaders arrested. Truth wins. FBI unmasks systemic corruption in New Haven PD. Hours later, on the courthouse steps, Naomi stood before microphones, flanked by federal agents and legal observers. I told you he wasn't just a defendant, she said. He was a mirror the system couldn't face. Kendra stood at home, watching the coverage on TV. When Jalen's face appeared on the screen, not as a mugshot, but as a whistleblower, she smiled through tears. Behind her, a young girl who had survived the explosion watched in silence, hand bandaged, hope rekindled. And somewhere across the city, in a quiet room filled with old files and cold walls, Jalen sat with his hands folded, not in handcuffs, not in fear, but in clarity, because this wasn't the end, not of the fight, just the end of the lie. He looked at the camera, recording his statement for the DOJ, and he said, I'm done here. Next stop, Congress. Justice doesn't always wear a robe, and heroes don't always carry capes. Sometimes they sit in handcuffs until the truth kicks the doors wide open. Jalen Price wasn't just a black man in court. He was the mirror the system tried to shatter. But when it cracked, the whole house of lies came down. If this story moved you, don't scroll away. Hit that like button to show support for those who dare to speak truth to power. Subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories they don't want you to hear. Share this video with friends, family, everyone, because justice doesn't spread in silence. Let them hear it. Let them see it. Let them know we're watching now.